I haven't had sex in 6 months. There are lines you laugh at when you are 20, but once you are past 40, they land differently. They sit heavy, like a long breath someone has been holding in for too long. And out on the dry western edge of Arizona in the 1950s, Hank Cooper, a rancher far too familiar with silence, never expected he would hear a line like that on an ordinary afternoon. Hank was fixing the back fence when Duke, his old dog, lifted his head and perked up one ear. He did not bark. He only gave a low rumble, the kind that said someone was coming, but not someone with bad intentions. Hank turned and saw pale dust rising along the dirt road leading toward his ranch. At first, he thought it was a man on horseback, but as the figure came into view, he straightened, narrowed his eyes, and wondered if the desert sun was tricking him. The person walking toward him was a woman, an Apache woman, one so tall her shadow stretched over half the front fence. She was not riding. She walked, leading a worn-out bay horse beside her. The horse's head hung low, its front leg dragging slightly. But her stride was so steady, Hank thought the horse might collapse before she ever would. When she stepped into the yard, he saw clearly that she stood at least a head and a half taller than he did. Broad shoulders, strong arms, hands large enough to bend a fence rail if she wanted to. Muscles moved under her faded cotton shirt, the kind of strength built from hard work, not show. Hank had never seen a woman like her. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, keeping his voice even. Aiyana looked at him for a moment, then toward the old trough. "My horse needs water," she said. Her English was firm, a little heavy, but clear. Hank turned the handle and let the water fill the trough. He glanced at the horse's leg. That one must have been on the road a long time. "Longer than I meant it to," she answered. "I got greedy, tried for a few more miles. Now it hates me." Her blunt tone made Hank laugh under his breath. When the horse finished drinking, she leaned down and scooped a few handfuls of water. Hank handed her a metal cup. Watching her drink, he saw how dry her throat was, the tendons standing out under the sun. "I'm Hank Cooper," he said. "This ranch is mine." She lowered the cup. "Aiyana." She offered nothing more. Hank nodded and looked at the horse again. "It will not get far tonight. If you want, you can leave it in my barn for the night." Aiyana studied him, as if she were checking whether his offer carried hidden weight. After a long moment, she said, "You are not afraid. A big Apache woman asking to stay the night. Folks in town would talk plenty." Hank shrugged. "They talk about everything, new trucks, new chickens, who cut their hair crooked. If they want to talk more, that's their business. I still have to get up at 5 to feed the cattle." Aiyana looked at him a long while, then let out a low, honest laugh. "All right," she said. "If you give my horse a place, I will help with something. I do not stay for free." "You don't have to." "I do not stay for free." Her tone was final. Any man with sense would stop arguing, so Hank did. The afternoon passed in the sound of hammering and wire tightening. Aiyana worked with a speed and strength that made Hank stop himself from staring. By sundown, the sky purpled over the barn. They settled the horse, and Hank carried 2 old wooden chairs to the doorway. He poured coffee for both of them. Aiyana sat. The chair creaked under her weight, but held firm. "How long have you lived alone?" she asked. "Long enough to think of my radio as a close companion," Hank answered. "What about you?" "On the reservation, there are always people. Sometimes I think living alone must be peaceful. But when the wind changes at night, I find myself wanting to hear somebody's voice." Hank knew that feeling all too well. Then he slipped. "You don't have a man?" Aiyana turned. Lantern light softened one side of her face. She didn't blush or flinch. She simply gave a slight shrug, calm as if she were talking about the weather. "I haven't had sex in 6 months," she said. Hank almost dropped his cup, and for a few seconds, just like the title promised, he completely forgot how to breathe. For a few seconds, Hank wasn't sure what his body was doing. His hand still held the cup, but his lips had gone dry. His throat felt tight, and his heart was beating loud enough to echo in his ears. He had faced gunfire, had lain in trenches listening to bullets snap past his head. But not once had a woman's sentence ever turned him into solid wood the way that one just did. Aiyana tilted her head, studying him like he was some startled animal. She didn't laugh. She didn't tease. She simply observed. "What's wrong with you?" she asked honestly. "Did I say something wrong?" Hank coughed once and brushed off his shirt as if a little dust might rescue him from embarrassment. "No, nothing wrong. You just say things real direct." "Where I'm from," she said, "people talk straight so nobody wastes time. I wasn't trying to tempt you. I was answering your question." And she was right. She had said, "I haven't had sex in 6 months," the same way someone would say, "It's hot today." No hint, no meaning between the lines. Just fact. Hank tried to gather himself. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and exhaled long. "You talk so straight I can't keep up." Aiyana shrugged. "I'm not good at circling around things. Men in town talk sweet in the front and speak poison in the back. You don't." "I don't?" Hank blinked. "You look at me like a person," she said. "Not like my size, or the fact I'm taller than 3 men put together is a problem." Hank let out a short laugh. "Well, I can see you're big, but I've seen tanks. Nothing to be scared of." Aiyana looked at him for a beat. Then, truly for the first time, she laughed. A real laugh. Low, warm, clean, like a dry log splitting under an axe. Hank felt something in him ease. They sat quiet for a while. The horse shifted its weight. Dry hay rustled. The night wind slipped through the boards with a soft whistle. Then Aiyana spoke again, her voice lower now, not sharp but almost vulnerable. "You know, I said that because it's exactly how long it's been since I had anyone beside me." Hank stopped breathing again, but in a different way. In her eyes he saw a deep sadness, the kind carried by someone who has stood strong for others so long, she no longer remembers what it feels like when someone asks if she's tired. "At the reservation," she continued, "men see me as a warrior. They respect me, but they don't see me as a woman." Hank softened his tone. "No one?" She shook her head. "White men are scared. Apache men admire, but they don't want to hold a woman who might be stronger than them. Everywhere I go, I'm the strongest one, the tallest one, the one asked to lift the heavy things. But sometimes," she paused, drawing a slow breath, "sometimes I want someone to stand beside me without needing me to guard him." Hank set his cup down. "I'm sorry if my question earlier made things uncomfortable." "It didn't," she said plainly. "I just didn't want you thinking I said that to start something. I said it because I don't know how to keep things inside." Hank nodded. Little by little, he began to understand her. This giant woman, the one the whole town would whisper about, was really someone who just wanted to be seen as a human being, as a woman. The barn fell into a quiet, that wasn't awkward but honest, the kind of silence two people share after they've stopped hiding their hearts. Aiyana finally looked out at the night. "If I scared you, I'll head back to the reservation in the morning. I'm only staying tonight because of the horse." Hank shook his head quickly. "No, you didn't scare me. I'm just surprised, but not scared." Aiyana held his gaze for a long time. Then she nodded slowly, gently, as if relief had slipped through her chest, but she didn't want to show too much. "Good," she said. "Then tonight is peaceful." Before she stood, she added softly, almost like the wind brushing past cactus spines, "Thank you for not laughing when I said that." Hank replied, "I didn't think there was anything funny about it." And in that moment, under the weak yellow lantern, with the horse breathing steady in the background, the real story between them quietly began. The next morning, Hank woke up feeling different. Not because he slept well, he didn't, but because sometime around midnight, he heard Aiyana coughing softly from the horse stall, turning over on the straw, and the tired brown horse breathing heavier than usual. There was a new presence on the property, something unfamiliar yet not unwelcome. It felt like the place finally had a sound besides the radio and the wind. When Hank stepped outside, Aiyana was already awake. She stood by the corral, tightening the reins, her broad frame silhouetted against the pale morning sky. Sunlight caught the muscles in her arms, but her face held the calm of someone used to long roads and longer silences. You would never guess that a few hours earlier, this same woman had said the most startling sentence Hank had heard in his adult life. "The horse is better," she said without looking back. "But we have to go slow. Maybe 1 or 2 more days before I head home. If you need to stay longer, no, I will not trouble you more than 1 night." The words were short, but they carried something deeper. It wasn't that she was in a hurry. It was that she was used to not belonging anywhere for long. Hank wanted to say something kind, but morning was never his best time for tenderness. Instead, he offered what he knew. "If you want breakfast, I've got bread and coffee left." Aiyana gave him a sideways look. "You keep offering coffee. I almost didn't sleep because of it." Hank laughed. "My coffee is always stronger than it needs to be. Why not make it weaker?" "Because if I make it weak," Hank said, "I'll fall asleep on my feet." Aiyana studied him as if trying to figure out whether he was joking or simply odd. She finally nodded. "I'll eat." But the trouble didn't begin with breakfast. It began in town. Near noon, Hank drove his old truck into Dry Creek to get feed and a couple rolls of fencing wire. Aiyana stayed behind to tend to the horse, and Hank thought that would keep things quiet. But small towns never stay quiet. The moment he stepped into the feed store, he felt the eyes on him. At first he thought he had too much dust on his clothes, but when whispers bounced across the tables where the old-timers played cards, he knew something had gone wrong. Old man Carter, who had never met a roomer he didn't like, scooted his chair closer. "Hank," he said with a mix of amusement and curiosity, "heard you had yourself some company last night?" Hank sighed inside. "Where'd you hear that, Carter?" "Small town," Carter said with a shrug. "Your dog barks once, and the church ladies know before they finish supper." "My dog didn't bark," Hank replied. "Don't need to bark," Carter answered. "People saw an Apache woman tall as a lamppost walk onto your property. Didn't see her walk out." Another man added loudly, "Hank, I thought you didn't go for big women." Laughter rippled through the store. It wasn't cruel laughter, but it wasn't kind either. It had that childish, mean little edge small-town men sometimes get when they don't know better. The kind that mocked Aiyana for being Apache and mocked Hank for being alone. Hank frowned, not because they were teasing him, he could handle that, but because they spoke about Aiyana as if she were a strange animal instead of a human being who had fixed fences with him and slept on straw for her horse's sake. "Think whatever you want," Hank said, keeping his voice steady. "She stayed one night. That's all." Carter raised a brow. "Is it one night? In your horse barn?" "Carter." "I'm just asking," he said. "Funny how you look different this morning." Hank could have let it go. But then a younger man at the counter laughed and said, "Careful, Hank. A woman that big. You sure you can handle her?" Hank slammed the seed bag on the counter hard enough to shake the room. The store went silent. Hank's voice was low, but every word landed like a nail. "She's a person. Don't talk about her like that." Nobody answered. Carter looked at his boots. The young guy swallowed hard. They weren't sorry. They were just shocked Hank, the quietest man in town, cared enough to get angry. When Hank got back home, Aiyana was pulling a tarp over the barn roof to shade her horse. She looked at him instantly. "The town knows," she said. Not a question. Hank pulled off his gloves. "They're spreading rumors." Aiyana didn't even blink. "They always do. They look at me like I'm something not human." Then she faced him squarely. Her eyes held no fear, only honesty. "What about you? Do you think I'm something for people to gossip about?" Hank answered before she finished the question. "No. I think you're someone who needed a place to sleep and water for your horse. That's all." Aiyana was silent long enough for the wind to catch between them. Then she nodded, slow and small, as if his words pulled a heavy stone off her chest. "Sooner or later," she said quietly, "you'll see that standing next to me isn't easy." Hank looked at her, a woman strong as a gatepost, tall as a barn beam, but with a sadness in her eyes that only the lonely recognize in each other. "I've lived through worse," he said gently. "I don't think standing next to you is the hard part." Aiyana didn't smile, but something softened in her face, just enough for Hank to know. She trusted him a little more now. 2 days later, Aiyana's horse was strong enough to walk short stretches without limping too badly. Still, she hadn't left the ranch. Partly because the heat was brutal, partly because Hank insisted she wait until the sun softened, and maybe, though neither said it aloud, because neither of them was quite ready to part ways. That morning, Hank drove with her into town to pick up some wire and feed. Aiyana didn't care for Dry Creek, but she came along anyway. She knew that if she stayed behind, the town would gossip even harder. When Hank parked on the corner, a burst of loud laughter drifted across the street. Aiyana didn't react. She stepped out of the truck with her shoulders square, her gaze fixed on the general store. But Hank heard it clearly. "Good Lord, what is that thing walking this way? A buffalo cow?" Another voice chimed in. "No, that's Cooper's new lady friend." "Hero of the year, huh, Hank?" A few middle-aged men tried to pretend they hadn't heard, but none of them stepped in. It was the kind of talk Dry Creek was known for. Jokes too sharp to be harmless, laughter too loud to be accidental, and that sideways way they looked at an Apache woman as if she were something strange, not someone living. Hank clenched his jaw, preparing to say something, but trouble found them before he could. Down the street, a young Apache boy, maybe 10 years old, was holding a small bag of rice. 2 local boys snatched it from him and tossed it back and forth like a game. The boy jumped for it, but he was too small. One of the boys shoved him lightly and sent him stumbling over a rock. falling hard to the ground. Their laughter rang out again. Aiyana didn't move at first, but something shifted in her eyes. It wasn't rage. It wasn't wild anger. It was something deeper. A quiet that came before a storm. She walked forward. The street seemed to go silent. The boys stopped laughing the moment her shadow washed over them. She was so tall, they barely reached her chest. And what frightened them most was that she wasn't yelling. She wasn't even frowning. Her face was calm. Her voice was low and steady. "Which one of you made him fall?" The boy holding the bag forced a laugh, trying to hide the tremble in his voice. "We were just playing. Kids trip. No big deal." Aiyana didn't argue. She simply bent down, her large frame folding like a structure of iron, and lifted the Apache boy to his feet as if he weighed nothing. She brushed the dust off his knees, put the rice bag back in his hands, and looked him in the eyes. He whispered, "Thank you." Aiyana nodded once. "Go home. Do not come back here today." The child ran off. Then she turned back to the young men. "If you want to play games, play them with someone your own size," she said. "Not children." One of them tried to find his courage. "What would a big girl like you know about?" Hank stepped in before he finished that sentence. He didn't shout. He didn't puff up. He simply stood beside Aiyana, not behind her, not off to the side, right beside her. "That's enough," Hank said, his tone low but clear. "You boys ought to be ashamed, picking on a kid." The group hesitated. They weren't used to Hank Cooper, the quiet rancher who kept to himself, telling them off. One of them muttered, "So you're taking the Apache side now?" "No," Hank replied. "I'm standing on the side of a child being bullied." An older man nearby nodded slightly. A woman lowered her hat brim to watch. The whole street seemed to hold its breath. Aiyana's eyes shifted toward Hank. There was no watery gratitude in them. She wasn't that kind of woman. But there was something certain in her expression, like she had just proven a thought she carried quietly. Hank Cooper wasn't a man who said kind words for show. He would stand beside her for real. The boys backed off, mumbling, and walked away without looking back. When they were gone, Aiyana spoke softly, just loud enough for Hank to hear. "You didn't have to do that. People will say you chose my side." Hank shrugged. "So what? I didn't do anything wrong." Aiyana's voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it. "Child in this place, sometimes standing next to me is the wrong thing." Hank shook his head. "Not to me." She looked at him longer than usual, and for the first time since they met, her shoulders dropped a little. Not in defeat, but in relief. She exhaled slowly, as if she had been carrying her strength like armor for too many years. Hank didn't say anything else. He didn't need to, because they both knew that something had shifted. A first bond had been tied between them, strong and quiet, like a knot pulled tight by two people who needed someone to stand beside them more than they ever admitted. That afternoon, dark clouds rolled over the ridge like a heavy blanket dropping across the valley. Hank knew this kind of rain. Arizona storms never arrived politely. They fell like someone up in the sky had tipped a whole bucket at once. And when the first drops came, everything went quiet. The insects, the wind, even the cattle hushed, as if the land itself understood what was about to happen. Hank and Aiyana had just returned to the ranch after the trouble in town. Neither spoke much, not out of awkwardness or anger, but because both were thinking. Hank thought of the Apache boy's eyes. Aiyana thought about how Hank stood beside her without hesitation. That wasn't something she often saw from a white man. When the sky finally broke open and the rain pounded down, the drops were so heavy they sounded like stones hitting metal. Both of them ran for the small kitchen. The tin roof roared under the weight of the storm, and water dripped from the back corner in a steady beat. "Your roof leaks," Aiyana said. "Yeah," Hank answered as he pulled out 2 cups. "It's been leaking since 49. I keep saying I'll fix it." "Fix it when?" "Whenever I tell myself tomorrow." Aiyana let out a short laugh. Hank poured coffee, weaker than he usually made it. He didn't even notice he was doing it that way, but it meant he had listened to her the night before. They sat at the old pine table. No electric light was on, only a single oil lamp by the window. The warm glow made the room feel softer, even as cold wind slipped through every crack in the walls. For a long time, they just listened to the storm beating against the house. Finally, Aiyana spoke, her voice low but no longer sharp. "You know, I'm not angry at those men in town." Hank raised a brow. "You're not?" "No." She turned her cup slowly. "I'm used to it. They look at me like I'm something strange, like a walking stone. They don't think I feel anything." Hank considered that. Then he asked quietly, "So what does make you sad?" Silence filled the room, long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. But she set her cup down, folded her hands strong enough to lift a fallen horse, yet trembling for reasons that had nothing to do with cold. "What makes me sad," she said slowly, "is knowing that I'm strong enough that people only see the strength. They don't see anything else." Hank's voice softened. "What do you mean?" "They see me blocking a saloon door or lifting sacks of flour or dragging a broken wagon," she said. "But they don't see that I like listening to my grandmother's stories or weaving yarn bracelets for little kids. No one thinks I can be tired. No one thinks I can be sad." Rain hammered the roof so hard it made the oil lamp flicker. But Hank saw her clearly. She looked nothing like the unshakable giant the town imagined. She looked like a woman who had carried her strength as a shield for far too long. Then she said something that made Hank's chest tighten. "When I said I haven't had sex in 6 months." She paused. "I meant that for 6 months no one has come close to me, in any way. 6 months without anyone touching my shoulder or asking if I'm all right. 6 months of not being seen as a woman." Hank swallowed hard. He suspected that was the truth behind the sentence, but hearing it out loud hit him deeper than he expected. He set his hand on the table and asked gently, "Aiyana, do you ever feel lonely?" She gave a small laugh, the kind that never reaches the eyes. On the reservation, people have families, husbands, ceremonies. I have strength. Strength is good for protecting others, but not good for finding someone who wants to stand beside me. The rain grew heavier, filling the room with a steady roar. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them, each carrying a kind of emptiness they didn't usually share with anyone. Hank took a breath. "I think," he said, "someone just has to be brave enough to see the human part of you. When they do, they'll see you're not frightening at all." Aiyana tilted her head. "Do you see that part?" Hank held her gaze for a long moment, then he nodded. "Yes, from the very first day." Aiyana didn't speak, but her broad shoulders eased, as if she set down a weight she had carried for years. A drop of water from the leak fell directly onto Hank's hand, making him jump. Aiyana chuckled. "Your roof really is leaking." "Yeah," Hank said. I guess I really should fix it. You always say you'll fix it tomorrow. Then, tomorrow I'll fix it with you. The moment he said it, he realized he had slipped. Aiyana didn't laugh, but her eyes warmed. All right, she said softly. I'll help. And in the sound of the rain pounding the earth, something opened between them. Quiet, unspoken, but unmistakable. They were no longer two strangers sharing a dry room. They were something closer, something beginning. After that rainy night, neither Hank nor Aiyana said anything about things feeling different. They didn't hug, didn't confess, didn't touch each other in any obvious way. But something in the air shifted. The way they looked at each other the next morning said enough. Aiyana brewed the coffee for Hank, a little weaker than usual, and he drank it without a single complaint. Hank finally patched the leak in the roof, and as promised, he did it with Aiyana standing beside him, pointing out which nail had rusted through. Small things, maybe, but for two people who had lived alone far too long, they were signs louder than any tender words. A few days later, Aiyana said she needed to return to the reservation. Her horse was doing better and barely favoring its leg. Hank nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. Yeah, you should go. Mornings are cooler for traveling. Aiyana studied him with an expression that carried a hint of reluctance. You don't want me to stay longer? Hank opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then he finally said the truth. I do, but I know you have your life. Aiyana nodded. I do, but that life doesn't have anyone standing beside me the way you do. Her words stayed with Hank long after she left, yet that goodbye lasted only 4 days. On the 4th day, while Hank was loading hay onto his truck, a Jeep pulled up to his gate. It was Samuel Briggs, Dry Creek's sheriff, holding his hat in both hands, face more serious than usual. Hank, he said, we've got a problem. Hank wiped his hands on his jeans. What happened? Samuel hesitated. Folks at the reservation say that big Apache woman who stayed with you was followed. Some boys from town tried to scare her. Hank froze. Heat flared through his chest. Who? Not sure, Samuel replied. Probably the same crowd from the other day. I'm not defending them. I just wanted you to know. Be careful. Hank thanked him, but he didn't plan on being careful. He climbed into his truck immediately. He drove straight to the reservation. The road was narrow, the wind harsh, dust flying up behind the tires. Hank had never visited often, partly out of awkwardness, partly because he felt out of place. But today nothing could have stopped him. When he arrived, Apache children gathered to stare, and the adults watched from a distance, cautious as they always were with a white man's arrival. A woman recognized him. You're looking for Aiyana? Is she all right? Hank asked quickly. She is, but sad. That was enough. Aiyana sat on a flat stone near the large tent. When she saw Hank step out of the truck, her eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. Hank? What are you doing here? Hank let out a breath and walked straight to her. I heard someone followed you. I wanted to be sure you weren't in trouble. Aiyana gave a small laugh. I'm big enough. No one can do much to me. It's not about fighting, Hank said. It's the looks, the comments. You told me that yourself. People don't treat you like you're human. Aiyana held his gaze for a long moment. Then she planted her hands on her knees and stood up. When she did, Hank had to tilt his chin a little higher to look her in the eyes. You really worry about me? She asked, voice low and soft. Hank didn't dodge. Yes, I do. Aiyana didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened in a way Hank hadn't seen before. It was the softness of someone strong who had finally met a person who didn't see her only as a shield, but as someone worth caring for. She stepped closer. Hank didn't step back. They stood so near that he could feel her warm breath in the cool afternoon wind. Aiyana said quietly, "Here. No one stands with me the way you did in town." Hank cleared his throat. "Well, I stood." "You didn't have to," she said, "but you did. And I noticed." People around them were watching. Children whispered. Women exchanged small, knowing smiles. But none of it bothered Hank. He wasn't here because of the town or the talk or the pride of proving something. He was here because he was worried for her. Aiyana lifted one hand and placed it on Hank's chest. Her hand was large, warm, powerful, but her touch was so gentle it startled him. "That day, when I said I haven't had sex in 6 months," she murmured. "It wasn't an invitation. It was the truth of someone who hasn't been touched with kindness for a very long time." Hank answered softly, "I know." "And you?" she asked. "Are you lonely, Hank Cooper?" Hank looked right at her, not avoiding anything anymore. "Yeah, I am." Aiyana let out a slow breath. Then she said, "So, maybe we don't have to be lonely by ourselves anymore." Hank didn't make any big promise. He didn't swear anything dramatic. He simply nodded, slow, steady, honest. And that one nod made Aiyana's broad shoulders ease in a way that showed just how much she'd been carrying alone. In that moment, with the wind moving gently between them and the reservation watching quietly, Hank realized this wasn't something casual. This was a turning point, a tender one, the kind that stays. That summer passed slowly, gentler than the ones before. Nothing dramatic happened. No fights, no arrests, no breathless chases or painful goodbyes. There were only 2 people, one from town and one from the reservation, learning how to stand beside each other without fear of the world's opinions. Aiyana began visiting Hank's ranch more often, not on a schedule, not with warning. Some mornings she arrived at sunrise with a small bag of popped corn the reservation children had made. Some evenings she appeared when the sky was turning gold, watching Hank shoe a horse. Other times she simply stood by the fence while Hank brought the cattle in, saying nothing at all, and Hank found that silence even more comforting than talking for hours. The strangest part was this: she stopped trying to prove she was strong. Of course, she was still powerful enough to lift a feed sack Hank needed both arms for, but sometimes, when they worked together, she let him carry the water bucket even though she could have done it effortlessly. It was not weakness, it was trust. One September afternoon, with the heat fading and the first hints of autumn drifting across the valley, Hank and Aiyana were fixing the north fence line, the same section where they had first met. Hank hammered a nail while Aiyana leaned against the post, arms crossed. "Cooper," she said with a teasing tone, "you're hammering that wrong." Hank looked up. "Wrong how?" "You're slanting it. It will loosen." He studied it. "Maybe. You're right." Aiyana smiled. "I know." Hank sighed, pulled the nail out and drove it again. "This is hard, Aiyana." "It's hard because you think too much," she said. "Just slow down." Hank kept hammering. After a moment, he said quietly, "I've been on my own a long time. When someone steps into that, I get scared of doing things wrong." Aiyana stepped closer, close enough that Hank could hear her breath. She placed her hand over his, a hand large and strong, yet astonishingly gentle. "Hank," she said softly, You don't have to be perfect. I didn't come here because you do everything right. I came because you're kind." Hank swallowed. So kind isn't always enough for a relationship. "For me it is," she said. "I have enough strength for the both of us." That made Hank laugh under his breath. Aiyana watched him with an expression he had never seen on her before. It was trust. Not the trust of someone relying on him for safety, not the trust of someone asking for help, but the trust of someone opening a door inside themselves that had been shut for years. That night the sky was clear, the moon bright and silver over the ranch. Aiyana sat on the porch steps while Hank came out with 2 cups of hot tea. The night was so still they could hear the cattle shifting in the barn. "Tomorrow I need to go back to the reservation," Aiyana said. Hank nodded, trying not to let the sadness show. "You should." "I'm coming back," she said immediately. "I'm not disappearing." Hank looked down at his hands, then at her much larger ones resting beside him. "Do you come back for your horse or for me?" Aiyana tilted her head. "For you." The wind lifted her hair across her shoulder. Hank looked at her strong face and heard the softness in her voice. He understood then that it wasn't her size or her strength that made her unforgettable. It was her heart, steady on the outside, but tender deep within. Aiyana reached up and touched his cheek. "You know what I like most about you, Hank Cooper?" "My weak coffee?" he tried. She laughed, a deep sound like distant thunder. "No, I like how you look at me as a woman, not as something enormous." Hank took a slow breath. "That's because you are a woman, and you're beautiful in your own way." Aiyana froze, not embarrassed, but surprised. Maybe it was the first time anyone had said it and meant it. She leaned her forehead gently against his. "Tomorrow I go home," she whispered. "The day after, I come back here." Hank closed his eyes and let the moment settle between them. "I'll be waiting." The next morning, Aiyana rode away from the ranch. But this time, Hank didn't feel that old ache of losing someone, because she turned back and smiled, a small smile, but enough to say, "Don't worry, I'll be back." And Hank knew she would keep her word. At a certain age, people stop needing big promises. They only need someone who returns once, and then again, until their presence becomes a kind of home. Aiyana would return. Hank would wait. No noise, no drama, just 2 people finding a quiet kind of peace in each other. And that was enough. In the old borderlands, folks didn't measure happiness by land or money. They measured it by whether someone cared enough to come back one more time. If this story touched you even a little, please subscribe and join me for more gentle love stories from the wild American West.